True resurrection. Well, this, as you may know, is the title of a book by Harry Williams, published in 1972, and he dedicated it to the Church of England Ramblers Association, interestingly enough. I obtained it in 1977 as part of my student life, so that kind of dates me really, doesn't it? But it's a book that I've always treasured and turned to in the Easter season. Now, Harry Williams was a member of the radical 1960s school of Cambridge theologians. In his books, he writes about his personal painful experiences, his long course of psychoanalysis following a breakdown. Growth became possible for him as he recognized much of his own church-based religion was a flight from the development of true self, which substituted for the true God, whose love had created him, the distorted image of a sadistic persecutor. It was said by those who knew him that much of this was connected to Harry's hidden homosexuality, and you've got to consider the period of that. Connected to his hidden homosexuality. In 1951, he was appointed to Trinity College as chaplain and tutor. In 1969, he became a monk, a member of the Community of the Resurrection in Mirfield, Yorkshire, not so very far away from here. And this is what he writes, and I'll read it exactly, about resurrection. Resurrection as a present miracle, and the word present is emphasized. Resurrection as a present miracle does not deliver us from the unevenness, turmoil, and fragmentariness of being human. The miracle is to be found precisely within the ordinary round and routine of our lives. Resurrection, he writes, occurs to us as we are, and its coming is generally quiet and unobtrusive, and we may hardly be aware of its creative power. It is often only later that we realize that in some way or another we have been raised to newness of life, and so have heard the voice of the eternal Word. Hopefully we'll have a few minutes later to consider what that might mean for us, resurrection as a present experience. Consider examples that we might relate to. I'll just share two examples with you, or three really, beginning with St. Bride's, because I see St. Bride's as an example of resurrection. And the story of St. Bride's, which has been shared recently, and those, Rose being one of them, who were that small faithful group of people who maintained a presence here that enabled the new life that we now are all part of and enjoy. That is resurrection, because of the faithfulness of that small number of people. Another church that I'm familiar with, it's actually in Ellesmere Port, not so far away, but you do have to cross the river. And this was a very traditional church, huge building, which had seen better days. The congregation had, you know where I'm talking about, don't you? The congregation had diminished at a great rate of knots. And this small group of people who were there, most of them on fixed incomes, there were only 2 members of the congregation in employment. And they faced the question of, well, what are we going to do? But they connected with a vision for the future. And the vision was to gut the interior of the church, to demolish the interior as it had always been. And there were those who didn't like that. Oh, you can't take away what we've always had. But they went down that route, and now at this church in Ellesmere Port, right in the centre of a community, and a community that suffers many, many disadvantages, and especially amongst young families. They created within what had been the traditional church a labyrinth, and there's labyrinth plans here, of course, aren't there? And they created a community cafe, and they had all kinds of work connected with that, helping to teach those who wanted to how to budget on low income and produce healthy meals. They had a worship area and a glass screen where the labyrinth was, and the community cafe here, the glass screen, the worship area, then people could walk through that if they want. So quite a remarkable transformation. And the thing that sticks in my mind was one older lady in the congregation talking about this vision which was underway, and it was hard work and they had to raise a lot of money, which they did. This older lady in the congregation in a meeting, Leslie might have been there, stood up and said, "I can't wait for my church to become a building site. I can't wait for my church to become a building site," which for me was a powerfully theological statement. She was connecting with the dynamic that is at the heart of our faith and at the heart of the Easter story, that death and resurrection go together. And we can only discover the possibility of new life when we are prepared to let some things go. If we hang on to the past, then that's a sure way that we're not going anywhere much. That is the dynamic of our faith journey and our spirituality. Another more personal example, and you might find this hard to believe, but I was involved in undertaking with others a cycle ride from Galilee to Jerusalem. Now, it was a few years ago. Yeah, you laugh, all right. But I did, and there were lots of people on this cycle ride. Galilee to Jerusalem, and staying in kibbutz for the most part each night. And there were a number of our young care leavers. This is when I worked for the, perhaps I didn't make that clear, the children's charity, UK children's charity. A number of young care leavers were on this ride, and money had been raised to enable them to do this, which was an amazing experience for them. And there we were, quite a collection. We had people from Nissan and other corporate companies who raised money for us, and they were there. So we were quite an amazing and diverse collection of people, and it was a real experience. On the last night, staying in a kibbutz, and the next morning we were to ride into Jerusalem. Can you imagine? Yeah. You're thinking I couldn't do it, and that was very nearly the point. The last night in the kibbutz, and this was my mistake, so this is my confession, a cow buyer had been in the past turned into a bar. Yeah. And my mistake was to join a lot of the younger folk in there for longer than I should. And the next morning, yeah, I didn't feel like cycling into Jerusalem, which is uphill. And I was on the point of giving up. I got off the bike, and I was way at the back, and I was just pushing it along, walking, because it was a bit sore being on it. And this young woman, Fiona her name, cycled back to me, one of the young care leavers. She'd spent most of her childhood in the care system. She had good reason not to trust adults, and especially men. But through the services that we offered, support for young care leavers faced with the enormous task of building an independent life with little support because their family weren't there to support them, through the love and care and support that she had received, Fiona had blossomed. That's the only word I can use. She'd blossomed. She was a vibrant young woman. She started to connect with her real potential, and she was about to go to university in the following September. Well, she wrote back to me, and I won't repeat exactly what she said, but she told me in graphic terms that if I didn't get back on that bike, I'd be ashamed of myself. Yeah? Well, I thought she was right. So under her cajoling, in graphic terms, and they were very graphic, because I got back on the bike, and though I wasn't exactly in the front ranks riding into the finishing post in Jerusalem, I made it, and I wouldn't have done it without her. She, for me, was an example of resurrection, newness of life. She discovered that through the love and care and support of others. And the other thing, and so she ministered, if you like, to me. And the other thing about, and others here know this as well, and even better than me, that the transaction between the cared for and the carer is not one way. Yeah? It's a two-way transaction. And so it was on that day. A friend of mine describes such encounters as an example of the sacrament of the person present. And Fiona was, for me, an example of the sacrament of the person present. So what about the Easter story itself? It's full of human reactions and emotions, and highlighted in the reading that Rose shared with us. There is confusion, there's running back and forth, there's fear and loss, human beings trying to make sense of something that doesn't fit with what they know about life and death. Now, we can engage, and people do, in unhelpful debates about the details. All I would say is there are discrepancies in the gospel accounts. That's a given. The women are the first witnesses. Isn't that good? And you need to put that in the context of the day, as you'll probably appreciate. In those days, women were not regarded as credible witnesses. And you can Google that up and find all sorts of stuff about it. But women were not regarded as credible witnesses. So the women who were the first witnesses to what happened were disbelieved. They were considered to be, a bit off their heads. If the accounts were tidy and completely consistent, you could imagine that they were completely made up. The truth at the heart of the story, I believe, is the Easter experience of those close to Jesus, whose lives were amazingly transformed by the realization that morning that love is stronger than death. And these were people who were completely disillusioned and in despair because everything that they'd given themselves to appeared to be lost. But that morning they discovered that love is stronger than death. Now we may say, what about the afterlife? So slight digression here, but I can't resist. Marcus Borg answers this question. I'm sure you'll have read this. In Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time, that wonderful book, he says this: so is there an afterlife? And if so, what will it be like? And he answers his own question: I don't have a clue. I rather relate to that. I don't have a clue. But I am confident that the one who has buoyed us up in this life will also buoy us up through death. We die into God. What more that means, I do not know, but that is all I need to know. Do you like that? I like it. So I'm moving quickly towards a conclusion, yeah? Well, hopefully quickly. Another book that I picked up in the 70s in Rydal Hall in the Lake District, a place some of you will know, written by Monica Furlong, called Travelling In. And I've treasured that. The pages have gone orange now. She was an author, a journalist. She wrote for The Guardian from 1956 to the mid-60s, so she's got to be good. And she later worked for the BBC. She was committed to campaigning and supporting the ordination of women. She wrote about emotional and socio-sexual issues. She was a founder member of the St. Hilda community. And here are her words that I came across in this book about an experience, an encounter leading to new life, resurrection. And I'll read it. I'll just move here so I can... So she writes, during the 2 years just before and after I was 20, I had two experiences which led to religious conversion. The first occurred when I was waiting at a bus stop on a wet afternoon. It was opposite the Odeon Cinema, outside the station, and I was surrounded by people, shops, cars. A friend was with me, and all of a sudden, for no apparent reason, everything looked different. Everything I could see shone, vibrated, throbbed with joy and with meaning. I knew that it had done this all along and would go on doing it, but that usually I couldn't see it. It was all over in a minute or two. I climbed on to the bus, saying nothing to my friend. It seemed impossible to explain, and sat stunned with astonishment and happiness. The second experience, some months later, I left my office at lunchtime, stopped at a small Greek cafe, get to the right place, in Fleet Street to buy some rolls, walked up Chancery Lane. It was an August day, quite warm but cloudy, with the sun glaringly painfully bright behind the clouds. I had a strong sense that something was going to happen. I sat on a seat in the garden of Lincoln's Inn, waiting for whatever it was to occur. The sun behind the clouds grew brighter and brighter. The clouds assumed a shape which fascinated me, and between one moment and the next, although no word had been spoken, I felt myself spoken to. I was aware of being regarded by love, of being wholly accepted, accused, forgiven, all at once. The joy of it all was the greatest I had ever known in my life. I felt I had been born for this moment and had marked time until it occurred. And I like this bit. I became a Christian, went to church, received Holy Communion, argued with the priest. It was like moving blindfold through a place which one very much wanted to see, but it seemed the right way to make the journey the right way for me. So I find that very engaging. Monica Furlong. So let me just share some of the words with you that speak to me, and that for me they connect rather with Monica Furlong's description of her experience. The poet Ee Cummings, a leading American poet, you know him? Yeah. He published a collection in 1935 called No Thanks, and I think that was the title because all his offerings to publishers had been turned down. And when he did get one published, he called it No Thanks, because that was the answer he kept getting. And in No Thanks, he said this: love is a place, and through this place of love move with brightness of peace all places. Yes is a world, and in this world of yes live skillfully curled all places. Ee Cummings. So the truth of the Easter story, I believe, is the transforming experience that the disciples encountered, the discovery that against all the odds, that love is stronger than death. The realization that everything that threatens to contradict this, and there is much that can appear to do that, is overcome. Death is indeed swallowed up by life. We can encounter this as a present experience, here and now. This is true resurrection. Here endeth. Have we got just a few minutes? Would you like to, as we do, just turn round to those close to you? And I would suggest that we might discuss how we consider this idea of resurrection as a present experience, newness of life, share anything that we may choose to, or consider Marcus Borg's words, and also perhaps to consider how we can indeed respond to the need to take on loss in order to discover new life. That's a hard one. Anyway.